everyone. It's great to see you guys out this evening. I know it's a tempting evening for you guys to relax at home and to maybe watch some movie, do something light. But here you are with us this evening to talk about issues around hate crime, racism, discrimination. This is something that we have seen for years, but in recent times, we have seen it lifting its ugly head again. And this is why we have chosen to call you out to stand with us as we talk about these issues. Now, I am your host for this evening, and we want to start by inviting the presence of God with us. We have asked Wes Mackenzie, the chair of our board, but he's not here as yet. We have also asked one of our past students, Miss Aminata Berry, to do the land acknowledgement. And I've been looking, I have not seen her, but we got to get things going. So I'm just gonna say a few words of prayer, and then we will move on. Heavenly Father, we come before you this day to honor you, to magnify you, and to glorify you, because you are our creator. We are one people. You made us according to your will and in your likeness. So we just want to acknowledge you as we move to speak about issue that concerns us as BIPOC people. We want to confess our weaknesses and shortcomings. And at the same time, we just want to thank you for your love, for your goodness and your support, for the strength you have given us to do the various things that we do as we strive to honor you. We also ask for your supplication that you will nurture us and strengthen us and help us to come to acknowledge and realize that we are all one people, from one source, you. So as we come this afternoon, oh Father, we invite you into our presence, and we ask that you may guide and direct us as we address these issues that are all pertinent to all of us. Again, we glorify you, we magnify you, we look to you for guidance and direction. And this we ask in no other name, but in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay, if Aminata is present and I missed her, would you please step forward and do the land acknowledgement? I take it that I probably was right, that I have not seen her, so we'll move on. At this point, I will move to make the official welcome and formal introduction as we get this community forum going. So again, good evening, everyone. And for those of you who do not know, I'm Ron Cunningham. I'm the founder and executive director of CACD. And I've been asked to be the host for this evening and to welcome you and to introduce you to this community forum. And I've indicated before, it is a cause for which we are all involved. It's something that I believe that we all need to come together to talk about, and especially how this is impacting our youth. And as you know, the purpose of CACD is really to address the needs of BIPOC youth aged 10 to 24. So let me begin by welcoming you all present, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. But please allow me to welcome a dear friend, Sylvia Winters, who has so kindly donated 2 books, which is Burden Legacy. So I hope that someone from the group here will win one of these books. And we just want to thank Sylvia for the great work that she's doing and continue to do in her writing. Let me also thank other key supporters for the cause for which CACD stands, such as the Ministry of Education, the Ontario Ministry of Education, the City of Mississauga, the Region of Peel, Community Foundation of Mississauga, Ontario Trillium Foundation, my church group, Rock and River Congregation, for their ongoing financial, moral, and spiritual support, and our community partners, such as Achieve and CMHA, who are with us practically every day as we run these programs for our youth. Let me also thank our special guests, the panelists. I will not go in much detail at this point, as I will be introducing them later, but just to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Anthony Hutchinson, Miss Salia, and well, Miss Sophia Ramsey was supposed to be here, but unfortunately she got held up at work and probably will not be meeting with us tonight. Mr. Imran Hassan, Aman Sohota, and of course, our 2 students, participants, Amna Mohammed and Aman Rajiv. Let me also acknowledge our co-host, not co-host, my apologies for that, our moderator, Miss Carissa Withingham. Now, so again, I welcome you all and thank you for taking time out to be with us as we address these key issues. And as I look, I can recognize we have our good friend, Renee Wallace. We just want to thank her for being here. And I also can see Marjorie Taylor. Thank you, Marjorie, for your continued support. And at this point, I will move to formally introduce our panelists. But before I do that, I just want to assure you all that we are in for a treat this evening. We have a very dynamic panelist, and we have a very motivated moderator. So I'm sure she's going to pull information from them in ways that we have not seen. We're gonna have a lively discussion. And just to explain how basically it will work, for the first segment, we will have our guest panelists talking about their experience with racism, discrimination, and hate crime, and how it has really impacted them in their work, in their field of employment, occupation, etc., etc. So you will have, panelists will have the floor for 3 to 5 minutes talking about the issue of racism, discrimination, and the impact it has on them and in the field of work that they do, be it education, be it mental health, be it justice, etc., etc. Okay? So let me introduce our distinguished panelists to you all. We have Dr. Anthony Hutchinson, who is a versatile social worker and healthcare professional who specialized in area of psychosocial forensic and clinical assessment and treatment. In addition to being a well-regarded, dynamic, and engaging university professor, Dr. Hutchinson is also a multiple-time judicially qualified expert witness at the Ontario Court of Justice and Supreme Court of Justice level. Is someone I know for years, and I can vouch for the expanse of knowledge and for the work that this man has done. I would also like to introduce Salia Khan. I've not met Salia in person, but she's like someone I've known for years in a very short time, someone that is committed to the cause, someone that is dedicated. But let me read a bit about Salia to you. Her area of expertise includes social justice, human rights, hate crime, and the settlement sector challenges and opportunity with new Canadians. She has worked in the human capital and diversity field for more than a decade. She has volunteered with child and youth organizations that focus on bullying and on the protection of children from dangers of the internet, something that is very common for us here at CACD. She is also involved in volunteer effort in empowering women and members of immigrant community regarding issues of partner and domestic abuse. Also necessary, critical, and meaningful. The next panelist is Mr. Imran Hassan. Imran has been serving as the chair to Peel Crime Stoppers, a citizen, media, and police cooperative program designed to involve community in the fight against crime. This is something that, again, is very meaningful to CACD. That's how we got started in the first place in 2005. In terms of the year of the gun, we were moved to do what we are now doing. The programs provide citizens with a means to supply police with information anonymously. Cash rewards are offered to people who call the program with information which leads to an arrest. Through this unique partnership of police, media, community, and of course us as citizens and our community members, we can all help to maintain and improve the quality of life within the region of Peel. That's a noble mission for us all to look to. Our next panelist is Mr. Aman Sahota. Aman is a recent graduate from the University of Toronto and the co-founder of EI Amplified, which was named the Canadian EdTech Startup of the Year and a top 21 of 2021 in learning and technology. EI Amplified focused on creating emotionally intelligent leaders through empathy-based experiential learning. Their workshop bring real-world application to school through STEM and art-based social emotional learning. And we can vouch for that because he's assisting us in that regard with his presentation to our high school student and also assisting us with the evaluation of our programs. Then next, I would like to introduce our two youth participants. We have Aman Rajesh, who is a grade 12 student at St. Thomas Aquinas Secondary School. He's creative and caring and aspire to study engineering. Yes, we need those STEMs in our society. The next youth is Amna Mohammed, who is a grade 12 student at St. Francis of Xavier Secondary School. And we're always fascinated by St. FX. St. FX was where we started off in 2005, running our workshops for students. And we continued for about 3 years. And then the mayor called us in and said, for the work that you guys are doing, we want you to have a place at the Mississauga Valley Community Center, and we have been there since. So as I continue on Abna's bio here, she is involved in many extracurricular volunteering activity to help her community. She started her own club, Active Mind Xavier, to help change the culture around mental health. Abna has many hobbies such as painting, rugby, running, and baking. Oh, I like the tone of the baking there. We are having our in-person program, Abna. You can join us one evening and bake up some goodies for us. She also wants to go into mental health field and to go to med school to become a psychiatrist. I'm pretty sure you will do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's our panelists for you this evening. And at this point, again, I'm just going to reiterate as we move into the first segment that we will ask each of the panelists to take 3 to 5 minutes to speak about their exposure, their understanding, their experience with racism, or what they know that is happening in our society. There is so much going on, and you have this free reign to speak about it. But I was just given a note that Aminata is here. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to invite her to do the land acknowledgement. And then thereafter, we will ask our moderator to introduce or to call the panelists to speak in this first segment. And again, it's trying to get you to focus and use this segment to talk broadly about the situation. We will ask specific questions for each of you in the second segment. And then the third segment will bring the whole community in when we will have questions and answers. So Aminata, if you're there, could you please step forward and do the land acknowledgement for us?
Hi, Ron. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first, we would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather and which the region of Peel operates is a part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples have inhabited and cared for this land, and we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, we give our respect to its first inhabitants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aminata. I'm glad that you were able to be here. I'm glad you're able to be here and do that for us, because it's so important that even again, in a virtual space, that we acknowledge the land that we're on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad I could do that for you. No problem.
Mm-hmm. So with that, now that we have acknowledged our land, we have kind of blessed this place, we have acknowledged who's in this space and the panelists that we have, I think it is time to get into the conversation, right, guys? I know I did see some chat happening in the chat box of Rowan saying, yes, this topic is important. This is why they're here, because they want to be a part of this discussion, which is awesome. And so as Ron said, I will let the panelists start off. Then we will have a portion where I will ask them their specific question, and then we will open it up for the floor to ask their questions. So if you have questions, keep them ready for that portion of the evening. I will let panelists start off in the order that Ron introduced you. So first, that would be Dr. Hutchinson. As I looked in the room, I didn't see Imran. So we'll do Dr. Hutchinson, we'll do Celia, we'll do Aman, and we will do our students, Aman and Amna. So Dr. Hutchinson, would you like to start us off? And of course, if you were able for our panelists to have your camera on, that would be wonderful to see your face if you're able to have that technology access.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ron, for inviting me to participate in this. I guess what, in terms of what they've asked me to talk about, I'll start by giving a survey quickly of where we are, I think, in Canada, as basically I dealt with in a vital document produced by the government of Canada, which looked at the issue of race inequalities, equity inequities in Canada related to terms of health. So social, economic, and political factors shape conditions in which individuals grow, live, work, and age, and they're very important for health and our well-being. Inequities in these conditions can lead to inequalities in health. When these inequalities are systemic, unfair, and avoidable, they can be considered inequitable. In other words, health inequities are not simply numerical differences between health outcomes of different groups. They're also unjust differences that could be eliminated or reduced by collective action, such as a group like this, and the right of a mix of public policies and even public spaces. In recent years, some of you have probably identified, racism has been increasingly recognized as an important driver of inequitable health outcomes for racialized Canadians, BIPOC people. Black Canadian communities, for examples, and their allies, maybe Indigenous peoples, have long advocated for increased recognition of specific health and social impacts of anti-Black racism in Canada, for example. Anti-Black racism is a system of inequities in power, resources, opportunities that discriminates against people mainly of African descent, Afro-Caribbean descent, and any other related diaspora. Discrimination against Black people is deeply entrenched and normalized, actually, in our Canadian institutions, in our policies and practices. And quite frankly, it's often invisible to those who don't feel its effects, which actually could even be racialized populations themselves or dominant kinds of populations. This form of discrimination has a long history in Canada. It's uniquely rooted in the European colonization of Africa and the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery actually was legal in Canada up until 1834. So you can put that in your trivia hat there. Almost 2 centuries later, racist ideologies established during those periods in history are actually continuing to drive processes of stigma and discrimination even in 2022. Today, Black Canadians in particular experience health and continue to experience health and social inequities linked to processes of discrimination at multiple levels of society, at individual, interpersonal, institutional, and societal discrimination. Experiences of interracial racism can be overt, such as harassment or violent attacks, or it can be subtle and pervasive in the form of daily indignities, little slurs, inappropriate verbal expressions. There's well-documented examples of institutional and societal levels, including racial profiling, over-policing, surveillance and harassment, excessive use of force by police, and under-policing, under-responsiveness, not paying attention to racialized calls for help, or even abandonment. There's overrepresentation of Black people in our criminal justice system, similar to Indigenous peoples. There's also overrepresentation of Black youth and children actually in our child welfare system, again, similar to Indigenous populations. Systemic discrimination and undertreatment in hospitals has been well documented, and in our healthcare systems in general, stereotyping and discrimination. And there's low representation or an absence of Black people in leadership positions across our institutions and our systems. And when it does occur, it tends to be more tokenistic or not really key leadership roles. Or it's tokenistic as well. The impact of these experiences through a lifetime can lead to chronic stress and trauma for people of racialized background. There's growing evidence of the negative effects of chronic stress, experiences of trauma on mental and physical health. Importantly, these effects can be felt by individuals, families, and communities across generations. Processes of interpersonal and institutional discrimination can also reduce access to material and social resources needed to achieve and maintain good health over the lifetime or the lifespan development. Inequities in access to education, income, employment, housing, food security can also drive inequities in health and well-being and are certainly prevalent amongst the racialized populations. There's intergenerational effects, such as the inability to transfer wealth. It's hard to transfer wealth when elders don't have wealth, and which can shape the life of each new generation. And so we could see that why we know that getting a house, for example, in the GTA is next to impossible just for the average person, forget people who have financial barriers. Although inequities for Black Canadians as a group are discussed in the following sections, it's important to acknowledge that experience of discrimination and responses of resistance and resilience can look very different. And I guess we'll be talking about that today in this group.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchinson, for kind of laying that out and kind of just hearing it said out loud. You know, because we do understand racism to an extent, but hearing the levels of what's happening here when we talk about our schools and we talk about the impact of it and how it is impacting our health. So I'm excited for us to keep unpacking that. You know, I'm writing notes as you're talking. I'm like, oh, I actually need to ask more about that. But I thank you thanks for laying that out for us. Next, I have Celia, if you want to go ahead and kind of share just how you see discrimination, hate crime, and racism operating in your everyday life and in your work.
Good evening, everyone. Celia here. I guess the kind of the direct linkages between racism and acts of violence and how hate and hateful attitudes and thought processes and beliefs and identities have such a murderous impact. We just have to look what happened 10 days ago in Buffalo. We don't have to go further back. I mean, this is an unfortunate reality for so many people of color, Black folks specifically in the North American context, United States, have been on the receiving end, have been on the targeted, have been on the what could be considered as a strategic, tactical strike basis to say they are going to continue to attack and challenge and unfortunately commit acts of violence against Black bodies. And when the professor before, doctor before, had talked about racism and we talk about impact of racism on public health. We also recognize the context of racism and how it has been used to inject poverty and also to criminalize the experience of the folks that would identify as Black or that would identify as racialized. And it becomes even more challenging in the capacity where in Canada, under the Multiculturalism Act, where diversity is and I will say supposed to be upheld and is supposed to be acknowledged and is supposed to be celebrated, I think we really need to come to recognize that as we go beyond 2020, 2022, we we need to acknowledge and affirm the existence of hate, the existence of racism, the existence of white supremacy, the existence and systemic nature of racism that tends to really that you will find kind of overlaying on how most of our even public institutions end up functioning under as public service. And that's very distressing to hear, but I think we do need to acknowledge it. I am going to refer to Justice Murray Sinclair and how he has referred to the work that was done under Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and how he has talked about the direct linkages to colonization and the cultural genocide that had continued to happen. And that's where it is. You know, we talked about slavery just being, I mean, even if you would use the word abolish, I still, on a personal level, it kind of doesn't really sit well with me. But we know perfectly well that over time, a lot of the systems and a lot of the business related and the money making systems that had existed, I mean, even in terms of how townships came to come about in the first place and get established, and how provincial laws were established, it was basically to ensure that men in positions of power, white men in positions of power, were making money, were securing the funds that they had, and nobody else had either access or could even put a dent in them. So the systems that have been put in place, and again, in terms of how law enforcement was seen to be the tool to support the autonomy and the authority of the white man, I think that also needs to be recognized for what it was. We know, of course, the impact of the policies around residential schools and around how that had been implemented and impacted and unfortunately perfected to the point where to date we continue to find is such a sad word, but we continue to uncover we have uncovered more than 10,000 bodies of children that have been lost to their parents and that have been lost as generations. And it's within us, it's within our own purview, it's within my timeline, within my lifetime, you know, it's here. And it's challenging to just sit at times and talk about, okay, well, you know, we're doing so much on a very personal level, on a very emotional level. I would say we haven't done enough. We haven't even begun to do. And so the first part of doing would be to acknowledge that racism, systemic racism, that challenges that exist are actually real. The second step for me would be to acknowledgement, of course, is that when we talk about hate crimes as they happen, that there's a deep connection to that ideological violence that is part of the process. And in a system which is very much based on proving intentionality, you know, it's about how do you prove that the person intended to hurt someone? So then we can actually levy some form of measurement of what that discipline is going to look like. That intentionality around hate and bias and prejudice is a tough one to prove. So it's been a challenge, but it's also been an absolute privilege for me to work in this field for the last more than 20 years now, working specifically around dealing with and challenging the notion of what hate crimes are, and also the need and the requirement for us to continue to hold the systems that exist accountable. And so for me, part of holding the systems accountable means that we will utilize them, that we will actually reach out, knock on the door and say, hey, you expect us to report to you, here we are reporting to you. one of the things I've consistently said whenever I work with communities around hate crimes, and if that has been an experience, I shouldn't say if, when that is an experience, please do let the public service that is tasked to support you, to offer you the service, let them know about it. Absolutely let them know about it. And we also have community organizations. We also have, stakeholders and Indigenous partners, and we have other folks in the community that would be there to support. So absolutely, that needs to be levied as well as a resource. But I know I have a very short time frame, but I just that we remember that whenever these crimes happen, these acts of violence, they may appear to target one person's identity, but in fact, it is a complete and absolute attack on an entire community. And again, unfortunately as well, so many times people are misidentified. And so sometimes those kind of hate crimes also kind of would get unreported because I don't see myself as one entity, whereas another person who is the perpetrator of this hate, in their hatred, only see any other person just fitting that category. So again, reporting of hate crimes is absolutely going to be an necessity. And I think we can talk about the stats and the numbers further on in the questions that will come up. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Sally. There's definitely stuff in there that is so relevant to even what we are talking about currently with the young people who attend our programs. In middle school, we were talking about bullying and that old age thing of like, if you have an issue, go to a teacher, and that conversation of, well, what if the teacher is the bystander? What if the teacher is a part of this institutionalized racism? What happens then if the adults in the room aren't able to help? And so it's definitely so relevant in the things that we're discussing. I appreciate the things you were saying again, writing down. I think how you said how racism is perfected. That really, really stuck with me, and we will dive into that definitely more. Aman Sohoda, I will let you go because I don't see Imran in the room. So Aman, please, you've been in this space with us before, but for the new people in the room of just touching base of racism and discrimination, how do you see it taking part in our communities?
Yeah, for sure. First off, I want to say thank you to Ron, Trissa, Sonia, and my fellow panelists for allowing us to have the space and be vulnerable and be emotional and share our feelings. I play a few different roles working with EI Amplified, and just on a personal level. I coach senior boys basketball at Appeal School. I was an Appeal student my whole life. I also mentor marginalized groups at local high schools as well. And believe it or not, from when I was in high school, about 10 years ago to now, some of the very same systemic problems exist. For example, when I went to go coach at a senior boys basketball game, our team is majority BIPOC students. And we walked in and the crowd was saying, these guys are going to work at McDonald's. Oh, these guys are going to work at fast food restaurants just because we were people of color. So on that personal level, this problem still exists within schools. Now, my role at EI Amplified is I quantify emotions to look at problems such as racism, equity, and inclusion. And it's a very emotional topic, which is why it is important to measure emotions. And in some of those issues, what I really see is that there is a divide between the different stakeholders within education. It seems to be that people, they don't always believe that racism is happening in their own backyard, especially when it comes to administration. They're saying, okay, like we got this directive from the Minister of Education that talked about racism happening in Peel schools, but it's not happening in our Peel school. But what comes to happen is we do these studies, we do these results, we engage teachers, we engage students, and we engage parents. And then the teachers, they say, yeah, things like more often not teachers, especially non-racialized teachers, they talk about how they think things are going well. Students are getting equitable academic opportunities. Students are part of an inclusive environment. As in we start to engage students, and the students are telling a completely different story. And the students are talking about how their ESL support just got taken away. They're not allowed to wear certain clothing like do-rags because some people find it offensive. They talk about how the 2S LGBTQ plus community doesn't receive any support. Talk about how there's no gender normalization washrooms for people who don't identify as he or him or she as her. There's many problems and issues that come out of the data that we collect. And then we also see that parents, they don't always feel as if their voice is heard. In the majority of the studies that we see, parents, they feel as if their students are receiving equitable academic opportunities, or they don't know about the equitable academic opportunities. One of the major results that we found recently is that as we transition to a paperless learning community, this is actually causing inequity for parents who don't know how to use technology. Parents were used to getting textbooks when they came home from school, being able to go through different units, being able to see what their children are able to learn. But now they just come home and they see tests. So really, there's a various ranges of inequities happening within our system that we're not even aware of. For example, did you know that just transitioning to paperless learning can cause inequities within students? Did you know that not having gender normalized washrooms now is a huge problem as well for students, and not being able to identify and really share who they feel they are? Cuts in ESL budgets to go to equity. So cuts were actually made from ESL to promote more equity work being done. But cutting ESL budgets is actually inequitable because those students no longer have the supports they need, right? So I would say in my work, I've seen a lot of inequities just from kind of systemic things and trying to solve the problem of inequity. I think that we need to take a really data-driven approach. And Salia kind of mentioned it, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, we need to be able to measure and quantify the emotions and the voice we have. And that's what I really aim to do at EI Amplified. This is a very emotional topic where people need to be able to share their voice. Imagine all the stories and all the voices that were never heard due to racism. And Trista just touched on a really important point. It's like, what if the teachers are the ones that are the bystanders? That's why I aim to come in as a third party and really be in the evaluation piece and a partner with the school in order to try improving the school environment. Once we start having conversations around equity and inclusion, and we realize we're not the only ones feeling the same emotion, there's power in that because we can work together in order to make change. Thank you.
Aman, thank you so much. And actually, thank you for kind of bringing up that this can be a vulnerable space and kind of saying that again. And the fact that this is an emotional topic because we're talking about our lives and our livelihood. And I appreciate you saying that again, because this can be a tough conversation. Some of the stuff that's going to be brought up here, it's tough, especially when we consider where we're at of 2 years ago yesterday with when George Floyd was murdered. And of course, Sally, was you who mentioned the school shooting that happened. Like, we're in the middle of this. This isn't a past conversation, or this is currently happening. So I appreciate you kind of bringing up that this can be emotionally difficult. And the whole point you make of that doesn't happen here, of schools saying that happens at other schools. We're doing a good job. But the range of inequity, yeah, and the irony of taking away from ESL, conversation's getting good. It's getting difficult, but it's getting good. I appreciate what you shared. Imran, I see you're in the space. So glad you were here. Welcome. It's great to have you back in a CACD space again. So just to catch you up, you're still making good time. We're here with the panelists, kind of talking about how you see systemic racism, hate crime, and discrimination. Just in your work that you do, how do you see that taking a role and impacting the community? If you would like to start off with that, if you feel ready to jump in, we would love that.
First and foremost, thank you very much for the kind invitation. And Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham, you've been very kind in inviting me to connect with your community and your stakeholders. So thank you very much. I'm going to start off by saying I'm not a subject matter expert. I had the opportunity to listen to Aman, who spoke, at length about his experience, and obviously he has an academic background and experience in this field. I'm a community volunteer at Pure Crime Stoppers, and we're an anonymous tip line that concerned citizens can report, activities that are illegal or suspicious in their communities in the effort of helping prevent and solve crimes. Conventional crimes, we would all think of as, guns and gangs and, murders and all kinds of violence. But the non-conventional crimes that we're seeing more and more these days are hate-related crimes. And so that kind of brings us, to this conversation. And of course, we see every day in our environment, whether we work and where we learn and where we pray and where we play, we will see that there are inequities. We see that there are ignorances, and I think that's probably the starting point of any conversation, is not knowing. And I do believe that racism and hate and ignorance exists in every aspect of our society. And to some extent, but I believe that it's a responsibility upon all of us to help educate and bring awareness to our fellow neighbors. And I'll use just one small example. The Muslim community recently observed the month of Ramadan. And that happens every year. It happens at a different time of the year because of the lunar calendar is shorter than the Gregorian calendar. And so it's those kinds of, information that needs to be shared with our neighbors to let them know that, it's at a different time of the year for a reason. And then when we fast, why do we fast? And when we do break our fast, when do we break our fast? And how do we break our fast? And so I had the privilege and the opportunity to invite our first responders community to my home to break fast together. And so it was an opportunity for many of those who have never really been inside a home of a member of the community whom they know and work together with, but never really have broken bread together with, especially during the sacred month of Ramadan. And breaking the iftar together was somewhat of a very special and intimate and emotional experience, if I can say so. So I had hosted this at my home and had police, fire, and paramedics represented at different levels, and it was really quite an interesting conversation. And I always remind people that there are no bad questions, and it's never a good idea to assume. And so I put forward that conversation. We had a great dialogue. I think we broke down many barriers. And there was a lot of curiosity. There was a lot of enthusiasm, and the one thing that really brought us together was food, and that we were able to sit together and enjoy, whether it was a samosa or whether it was biryani or whether it was a fruit salad. We call it chaat. It was really something wholesome, and many of my guests had not had the opportunity to taste food from different, cultural backgrounds in that context. Obviously, if you go to a Pakistani or a Jamaican or Chinese restaurant, you'll eat the traditional, let's call it westernized version of a dish. But when you go in someone's home, you get to eat something traditional. And I think it's those small things that help break down those barriers of ignorance and help us, grow more closer and, more stronger together as a community. And so that's sort of, my small contribution to this conversation. As I started the discussion, I'm not a subject matter expert, but I do have lived experience. I wasn't born in Canada. I was born in Pakistan. I came to Canada in 1973 when I was just 3 years old. And I had the privilege of growing up in southwestern Ontario in different communities. And I grew up in a community that had a population of, believe it or not, 400 people. And that was in 1976. And today, in 2022, the population of that community is still 400 people. So it's those experiences, I believe, that enrich us, that make us more resilient, and help build up our understanding of other communities, other faith groups, other people from different walks of life, and their understandings and their thought processes and their perspectives. And really, I've had the privilege of growing up in small towns as 400, and as, of course, now living, working, and raising my family here in the greatest city in Canada. Arguably and biasedly, because I'm from Mississauga. So I'm happy to answer any questions if somebody has them. But as I said, my comments and my input will be from my lived experience.
And Imran, just the value alone. I've always someone who's been taught growing up to value lived experience. Like that that expertise in and of itself, of sharing part of who you are. First off, your comments about food is making people in the chat be like, I haven't had dinner or lunch today. Now, like, now I'm starting to realize how hungry they are. But I love hearing that the practical way of connecting with people, the practical way of breaking down barriers, and we definitely will get into it. And there'll be time for even if anyone has specific questions for you, we will have that portion of the night to ask that. But it's so helpful to see a community member in their community and what practically they're doing. And that's part of the conversation. And to me, that's, that's the type of expert. And we're all here to learn from each other. So I totally appreciate you being here in this space and saying that. Yeah, see, now you got everyone hungry, which I'm thinking that too. I'm like, yeah. And I do agree. Just that one comment of, I remember going to a friend's house who was from El Salvador and having food there and being like, this is what this is supposed to taste like when I eat this at whatever. Like, I thought
It's not the
I
same.
totally relate to that.
Yes. And if I can interrupt for just 1 second, Carissa, and ask Mr. Cunningham and Mrs. Cunningham if it's appropriate next year, if we can perhaps organize an iftar together as a community. I would love to have members of CACD join us, even if it's virtual. That would be fine. We did that during COVID-19, but we had the privilege and honor of hosting people at our home this year. And, God willing, we can do that again next year. And perhaps we can do that at a community center or somewhere where we can gather together as a large group. And it would be my honor to extend that invitation to CACD and your community partners.
Consider it a date.
This is recorded, so we have a record that it was said. We'll have to make sure everyone here is invited.
Fantastic.
And of course, in this space, I have our student voices, and they're voices that have I want to make sure are highlighted, and we hear from them as well. So I will start off with Aman. If you can let us know for your school and how you experience life, how do you see racism, hate crime taking place in your environment, in your school? If you want to start us off, and then I'll ask Amna the same question.
Hi, so I would like to start off by saying that in my specific school community, I think they've done a really good effort in trying to minimize issues of racism, hate crime, and discrimination. And in my experience, I faced very little, if at all, any hate crime in my school community. And I think the main reason for this is that my school is very diverse. There's a lot of different groups from a lot of different cultures, and our shared experiences as being a minority group in Canada, I think that really helps us to really respect each other. And this not only applies to the students, but also the teachers and the management at my school also, because the principal, the vice principal, people like that in power in my school, they're people of color also. There are clubs like the Black Student Association, the Women's Club, Mental Health Club, stuff like that, where you can go to address these issues in the community. But with that said, there's still a lot of less intense racism that really goes unnoticed in my school community, in the form of students joking around with stereotypes about each other's cultures with other students. There's also smaller instances with smaller stuff like microaggressions, stuff like that. And I think these small instances of racism really add up. For example, one stereotype could be that Asian students are really smart, but they do not have a social life, or that Black students slack off in school and are obnoxious. Things like these get brought up as jokes within friend groups inside the school. And I think this is one of the main issues in my community, because even though the students are saying it jokingly, it's really not good to really assume something about a person based on the stereotypes. And most of the time, the stereotypes are just straight up false, and they really have no meaning, and they're really hurtful to people. And by using these stereotypes, it can really grow and spread and become mainstream and can harm a large amount of people. So I think really in my school, there's been a lot of good work in the community that's been done, but there's still more work that needs to be done, because discrimination, racism is still a problem. And I think what we need is more people of color in the places of power, like the school boards, the school districts, and education ministers to solve issues like these.
Thank you so much, Mon. And I'm glad to hear, at school that like overall you feel comfortable and safe. And that does go to when we have BIPOC people in charge and in leadership, how the impact of that and the power of representation. I do feel that. And of course, what you're saying on these microaggressions of when do things stop being jokes and when do things stop being funny is a line that I think as a community, sometimes we struggle with on when to kind of draw the line on things. So you're bringing up some good stuff that I'm looking forward to diving into. And Amna, I would love it if you could touch upon the same things. How do you see racism and hate crime in your community, in your school? What does it look like? How does it shape?
Yeah, I'd love to. So hi everyone, my name is Amna, and I want to start off by thanking Ron and Sonia and the CACD for organizing such an important and relevant topic, part 2, that has not been talked about a lot. And thank you to the audience and panelists for having me as well. So I'm a grade 10, 16-year-old youth, and I have been a part of discrimination as well. Discrimination and hate crimes, unfortunately, have been found everywhere because for so long, people have been degrading others if they do not fit the norms or how they think life is supposed to be. If you were a different race, culture, gender, sexuality, or even a different social status, etc., you were discriminated against because you were not the norm. Ever since people realized that they should have their own rights, they have been fighting against these injustices, hoping that they can be free and have equal rights. And I've been growing up facing similar injustices, obviously not as extreme, thank God we're living in Canada, and learning about them in school. And even in 2022, I still hear and see discrimination in our communities, school, and even on the news. We need to talk about this and take action, every single one of us, to change, because the newer generations that are in the world right now have not made as many significant changes as this panelist said before. But we still have the chance to make the world safer for future generations. I also want to mention that there's a difference between equity and equality. People before us were fighting for equality, and we're still fighting that battle. But we have also been fighting for equity. The difference between the two are equality means that individuals are given the same resources or opportunities. Equity accepts that each person has different circumstances and gives the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome in their specific circumstance. My identity as a brown Muslim woman has given me obstacles, and I have heard many stereotypes and comments made about myself, such as she's brown, so she doesn't have a social life, or she's Indian, so she can't be Muslim. There's so many types of comments I've heard about myself just because I look brown and my family are from 2 different places. So my identity has affected my education, mental health, and self-esteem by these comments from peers, teachers, and even my own family. Growing up as a girl, I was always given tasks such as cleaning and learning how to cook, along with rude sexist comments from either my brothers or my family, just because that's how they were grown up. They were brought from India and Pakistan, where that's the girl's role. So it was just a norm to them, but it wasn't a norm to me. I grew up in Canada over here my entire life, but no one should be saying that, oh, girls should be doing the cooking and cleaning. Plus, I really don't like cooking, so that's there too. But being Muslim, having my last name being Muhammad, and having given students the power to use words such as terrorist to degrade me and my achievements, and finally being half Pakistani and half Indian, allowed teachers to find a negative attitude towards my experiences and use stereotypes against me. There's racism everywhere, and sure, yeah, it hurts, but we can't let it gain power against us. We own who we are and make sure that the attributes we use to describe ourselves create power in favor of us and help lead us towards our goal and achievements. I may not have always been positive about all of the experiences I've faced, but I've always tried to earn the best achievements and work hard to become a better version of myself. Not for anyone else's expectation, just for myself. And as a brown Muslim woman, I'm proud to call myself Amna and share all my experiences, whether they're negative or positive, because that's who I am and that's how I grew up. And I just believe that even though we have to face all this racism, discrimination everywhere that's in the world, even if we live in Canada, we can stop it because at least we know and realize that this is going on. The first step to facing such a situation is understanding that it is there and Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Amna. Even touching that point of acknowledging, yeah, which Celia said, so true. And I know I saw in the comments Rowan saying, like, I agree. And you being yourself betters the rest of us in this space when you show up true and authentic. And I appreciate your comment about family too, because actually I think we don't always discuss that as much as well. Even when we deal with these challenges within our families, like under our own roofs, what does that look like when you have people at home telling you who you're supposed to be, or people at home who, based on culture or where they've come from, have an idea of how we should be, and the challenge of being a young person and those things changing. I definitely appreciate you bringing that in. Thank you to the panelists to kind of getting us warmed up. I'm just furiously writing down notes of like, oh man, we need to touch on this, we need to touch on this. Of course, I want to make sure that we have enough time to hear the voices from our panelists, but also for these questions at the end. And so I do have specific questions for our panelists, and I will go back to Dr. Hutchinson to start. So Dr. H, you've talked about kind of these social determinants of health and anti-Black racism. And I'm wondering if you can just create that gap of how the experiences we have, like so many things that you touched on about even injustice in school, all these kind of things. How does that impact our health? What's that link between that? Because I think sometimes we don't always see how point A gets to point B. But what is that connection between this injustice that we face when we think of anti-Black racism and how that impacts our health?
So when we talk about determinants of health, it's interesting when we compare how they view it in the United States versus how we treat it in Canada versus how they treat it in Europe, and there actually was. At some point, if you understand, like America is, I call it a melting pot. There's no quote multiculturalism per se in America. You're just an American, You're going to be a hyphenated American, but essentially you're an American, even though we know it's just washing everything over. In Canada, we have a kind of a similar lie. We call it multiculturalism, where we give the young lady who said, what's the difference between equality and equity? Well, we'd like to believe we have equality and we have equity, but we actually don't. Now, when you go to Europe, their models, they really did try to facilitate equity and equality. But if you actually look at, and the policy framework was called social inclusion. But when you actually study social inclusion, which is a great idea, it's actually way better than multiculturalism, and it's way better than the melting pot. But when you actually look at it in Europe, it was mainly social inclusion, mainly for white people. And it only became pronounced when migrations of people of color, especially from Africa, started moving into France or moving into Sweden or moving into other Norway or other countries where it was predominantly homogenous, you see. So interestingly, Canada, they tried to initially, maybe in the early, late 90s, early 2000s, tried to bring over these social inclusion frameworks. I was part of that movement. And I was really supportive of it, except for one thing. It became very clear that Canada was really a land of social exclusion, and so as we were bringing over social inclusion, it began to show the inequalities and inequities. It was like a byproduct of the policymakers trying to bring this European social inclusion framework, which is really just for homogenous white populations in Europe, and bringing it to Canada. And as an academic of color, I was at the forefront of creating probably one of the top models in the country of understanding how to conceptualize this idea of social exclusion and the problems of why social inclusion wasn't really being treated fairly. So And so when we look at the determinants of health, you see, we kind of lump them all together. And we say, well, there's these factors that lead to health outcomes, such as education, employment, income status, income and its distribution, housing, transportation, access to food security, early life development, access to the social safety net, access to proper healthcare, and so forth. So all of these factors contribute to this thing called health. We're brainwashed in Canada. Everybody talks about our healthcare system, but when we talk about our healthcare system, we're usually just talking about doctors, hospitals, nurses, medicine, the big pharma. And, newsflash, that's not health. Big pharma is not health. Like pharmaceuticals is not health. Health is a strong immune system. A strong immune system is where you have access to good quality food and food security, where you have good access to, good housing, safe housing, where your stress is minimized. These are factors of health, not, I don't know how many people in the group have ever been really sick. You walk to the doctor's office and then you walk out of the doctor's office and you feel better, right? Usually you walk out with a prescription. So I know as a doctor of clinical psychosocial practice, I have patients who walk into my office, they have depression, anxiety, trauma. They walk out of my office with no anxiety, with no depression, with no trauma. So obviously they're getting better in my office for the service I provide, except I'm not funded by OHIP. I'm a private healthcare provider. We're not funded by OHIP, even though we make a difference. But the OHIP practitioners, you walk out of their offices and you have a prescription, but you're still sick. So I think how we conceptualize health, mental health, physical health, is really warped. So at that point, what I came up with my colleagues when we looked at the determinants of health back in the mid-2000s, and this idea of why was social inclusion so impossible to introduce? Why is equity and inequality? Nobody had called it. Like everybody was talking around it. We have multiculturalism, so we must be equal. We must be equitable because we have multiculturalism. But what became transparent to me, because I had a background in sociology as well, was that there were actually three key determinants. There were three key determinants, and nobody was saying this. And those three key determinants, you see, in sociology, we talk of this thing called socioeconomic status. But socioeconomic status is the summative combination of education, employment, and income. And if you have those three things, then you can get good housing for the most part. You can get access to good, even private healthcare, good quality healthcare, private healthcare. You can get access to supplements, vitamins, good quality food. You can get access to, nice transportation. And so, but nobody wanted to point this out. And so interestingly, just in 2020, we're in 2022 now, just in 2020, of course, the government of Canada, after the Floyd shooting and, all of a sudden taking race and racism seriously again in Canada, for a few months, all of a sudden the report came out in 2020. And what it said, the highlights, the barriers in education facing racialized populations is absolutely horrendous in Canada. The barriers in terms of employment are absolutely horrible in Canada. Barriers in equal access to or equitable distribution of income, absolutely horrible in Canada. So the three key foundations in Canada were leading to bad health outcomes, and we're still talking about it. And then one other area they went into was housing. Some concrete examples. Black tenants face significantly more landlord discrimination across the GTA, in Montreal, in other Canadian cities, right? And so people, you can't even get proper housing, and so people are forced into less safe housing or less quality housing. So
Right.
So in terms of the whole determinants of health thing, we have to look at those core factors: education, income, and employment. And once those things start to get fixed, then we're going to see equity and equality, as the young lady had pointed out, and good health and better health outcomes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Kind of outlining the difference between America and Canada, how we tend to be like, oh, we're not as bad as America, but we're dealing with these same issues. And then when it actually comes to measuring up and seeing the stats and the outcome, for having that disconnect. Sally, I see your hand up. I'm wondering if you want to add to that, and then also if you can go into just the question I have for you, and even regards to our institutions, like a police institution. The question I have is, the police are a long-standing institution, and what is it like making change with a system that has a long history? So even when we go into this conversation of like, this stuff has been happening, how do we make change? If you want to add on, because I saw your hand, and also go into that of how do we make change when institutions have long histories?
I put my hand up because I was like, it was a hallelujah moment when the doctor said George Floyd, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about it. I mean,
Racism was known.
Happened. It wasn't just George Floyd, and yes, whatever happened to George Floyd for 8 minutes and the seconds and everything, but we've had captures, physical, visual capturing of murders that had happened by police officers, by retired or ex-police officers, by people at large, just going about doing whatever they're doing. I mean, for me, the fact that Ahmaud Arbery and the way he was killed back in February, and just because it also happened to be around the same time when COVID-19 was the biggest news item that we had, it kind of just overshadowed. And I don't know, I am sure that there is some sort of research that would be available, or some sort of a hypothesis, that I'm absolutely putting it out there for the academia. But even in terms of how George Floyd became the incident, occurrence, and the act, how that in itself became synonymous to some form of uprising, and all of a sudden kind of this waking up. I wonder if it has to do with the fact that people were sick and tired of COVID by May. And finally, with the numbers kind of getting into that space between February to May, recognizing, oh yeah, things are not as bad. And yes, okay, maybe I'm not going to die, or heck, I don't care if I die. And then they're just out because the weather has changed. It's not freezing anymore. It's beautiful. It's sunny. And hey, since we can go out and be out in the streets, then we can go out and protest and come out in droves of tens of thousands, all of a sudden having had that awakening. So I would love to see, I mean, I'm sure that there's some research question out there, is why this particular incident and why not the ones prior to that, from February, March, April, and then soon after in June and July as well, because every month there was something. Anyway,
the same wonderings of that. It took people to have nothing else to do to realize how bad racism was. You know, people were stuck at home. It took that to like, that's when you decided to notice, because you had nothing else to do. I want the same stats. I want the same paper.
And I maybe perhaps I'm very cynical, and I'll chalk it up to my old age and my kind of crusty disposition, and we'll just leave it at that. When it comes to in terms of the institutional side, you're absolutely right. And I had mentioned earlier, of course, is when you look at institutions and the way they have been established historically to support the systems, one of the good things that we can say is as Paleosian policers, and the chief with his very open and honest approach in terms of identifying systemic racism and systemic barriers, and talking about the challenges that exist, and coming from that space of not questioning whether that is happening, but coming from the very simple space of, yep, it's there, we need to do something. So, one of the things that I've looked at as part of the job requirement for me in terms of looking at everything is a very deep dive into the policies and the procedures. And so definitely looking at the policies, are they inclusive in language? Are we aware of the damage of and the impact of the language that would be there on persons with disabilities, on kind of the whole gender dynamic and the gender equation side of stuff? Is it binary? Does it have to be binary only? Those are some of the ones that we can talk about and start kind of exploring. But absolutely, moving further in terms of just keeping in mind that when we talk about racism, that we need to have an understanding, a deeper understanding of what our perceptions are. And as I've heard students talk about, being in diverse institutions where people of multicultural backgrounds and multi-ethno-racial backgrounds are walking the hallways, I always feel it's important for me to remind everyone that racism and impact of colonial racism is generationally felt, to the point where, when Amna was talking about her experiences as a girl, and her experiences of being too cultural, like coming from a kind of a bicultural background, it's I'm going to use this, I'm going to say this word, this cream, fair and lovely, which is very commonly understood and known and recognized in South Asia, India and Pakistan, right? And you have similar skin bleaching products that are available in the Caribbean as well, and in Africa as well. And so that in itself is a direct result of how standards of beauty and standards of womanhood and femininity and manliness and what is considered to be fashion and what is considered to be beautiful and acceptable and to be encouraged has been so deeply connected with the colonization of that entire mindset that still continues to grow with us. And I think it's very important for us, to me, as there's a role that police has. The role that police has is absolutely around public awareness and public education, and they have a responsibility to name racism where it's to be seen, to talk about the systemic barriers as they exist, and also to allow people to create those safe spaces where we can come and actually have those very, very critical conversations internally, peer to peer, right? Internally, people who are working together in whether it's lateral work or whether it's kind of vertical kind of reporting, reporting up, reporting down, whatever the process could be. Civilians and uniform, like there's just so many layers of experiences that end up being part of a daily life, one shift work to another shift work to one day of work for every single one of us within the service as the members. And absolutely, you have the vastest majority of the people that are in the job because they want world peace, as cliched as it sounds, because they want to make the world a better place, because this is what they want to do at the end of the day. But we are all human. And I think that humanity needs to be understood and recognized and acknowledged. But beyond the humanity, there is a role for the institution, for the leadership, for the organizational leadership to take on that onus of really, really talking about that, identifying those systemic barriers and identifying those kind of issues that need to be done. So we're good that we have a leadership that is allowing for that kind of conversation to happen. I think it opens it up more for us to have those conversations critically across the institution, across the different institutions that we work with. This is work, whenever you're talking about working with institutions, it's not a singular person job. It is actually a multi-institutional aspect. So if we are going to talk about making any changes, we need to make changes in how coursework, in how justice system works, in how our mental health support is available or is being made available. what public health is doing, what is happening with public education, what is happening with schools and universities, what kind of supports do we have available for employment and employability around the people and the young people that we would have. So it's complex. And we can uncomplicate it by working together and by working collaboratively and pulling strings together along to say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm good at, tell me what it is that I can do here, this is what I have to offer. And I think that's one thing that our chief, and especially the approach around community safety well-being that's being used provincially, of course, and it's being supported provincially. I think that's one thing that we can use as a leveraging point for us. And I would definitely invite people on the panel and otherwise to kind of connect and learn more about it, because here we have an avenue where we can give input, direct feedback, and not that we have to wait to be invited, but we actually have an avenue to come in and say, this is what change needs to look like. So I'm hoping that we can some transformative change down the road.
Yeah, and I like that comment of like, let's uncomplicate things and let's figure these things out together. And as you mentioned before, of accountability, that's what these things are going to take, consistent accountability. Thank you so much, Salia. I'm going to go to Aman. You've been here in the past chatting with us, and of course, your comment on this being emotional and difficult. And so, my question I want to ask for you in regards to emotional intelligence, and even as we navigate these kind of tough conversations, and Salia making that comment of like, maybe I'm cynical, maybe all these kind of things that we process and these emotions that come up when we have these conversations and with young people. Can you please tell us? Let me get to my question. Can you please? I'm rambling. Can you please tell us? 1 second, I have it. How raising our emotional intelligence, how that can help students navigate tough situations, students and BIPOC folks. How does a higher emotional intelligence help us?
Yeah. First, before I dive deeper into that question, I want to give some practical steps, or what I think is practical, to help increasing your emotional intelligence. I think the most important component of emotional intelligence is having a growth mindset. What does a growth mindset mean? It means being willing to learn from others and using the world as your learning experience. But how do you really get to develop your emotional intelligence, and how do you really foster emotional intelligence? You must have a really strong identity. You must be able to say, this is who I am, this is who I'm confident in, and you must be self-aware of your pitfalls and the things you're really good at. And how do you really start to build your identity? I want to make this as practical as possible, but it's very difficult at the same time. Building your identity, you do that through using the world as your learning experience, and having a growth mindset is all about using the world as your learning experience. In order to help build your identity, you want to look to different mentors within the community. You want to read more books about how emotional intelligence about how EQ can be more important than IQ. You want to really look at finding your own purpose and building your identity and having that growth mindset. Once you build your own identity, you get a unique distinctiveness of your purpose. Your purpose is what starts driving your value and your principles. Your values and your principles are how you treat others, how you treat yourself, and how you increase your social awareness. I'm reading this book right now. This is my second time reading it, called Atomic Habits. It talks about the importance of building your identity in order to help you get to where you want to be. It's not enough to just tell people that they need to read or they need to find a mentor. They need to identify with the change that they really want to make. Building your identity is the core shift in really being able to make change within your community. Now, how does emotional intelligence help within your school or within your community? Emotional intelligence, it helps build stronger relationships because you're able to be more aware of other people and how they feel and how your words and actions impact each other. It helps you be more self-aware of knowing your own purpose, knowing your own actions, knowing what you want to do within your own life. And I think the biggest thing is it allows you to build more empathy. As you build more empathy, you're able to relate to others. Being emotionally intelligent means being able to put yourself in the other person's shoe. You may not necessarily agree with the other person, but you want to understand how trauma has impacted you in the past and how trauma may impact someone else's discrimination, or it may be just generational trauma that's being passed down. I think that's something that's not often talked about. That people that are being racist or discriminating is often a reflection of their own pitfalls because they don't have their own sense of purpose and they're often lost in the world. So sometimes we need to take a step back and be empathetic towards people and really help them find themselves so that we can build a more holistic community that focuses on learning. When you look at emotional intelligence, again, you're able to have better communication with your teachers by becoming more emotionally intelligent. You're able to understand different perspectives that you may not have always seen, right? Emotional intelligence, it's really, I think, the key in solving many issues within society opposed to equity and inclusion. I originally started off in the field of sustainability, and I saw that in order to really achieve a sustainable world, we need to be empathetic with how our actions impact each other. I think that EI not only helps with learning. One great quote I had at another roundtable I did was, learning is a feeling. So if you're always feeling positive emotions, you're going to positively correlate your learning with positive emotions. If you're feeling negative emotions, then you're going to correlate your learning with a negative experience. So you really want to find a distinctive purpose that drives you, that helps build your identity, and use the world as your learning as your learning tool. Every interaction that you have, every conversation that you have, take a step back and listen to what the other person's saying. I know we often hear this enough that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, but we really do need to begin listening to each other and reflect on what other people say and reflect on our own actions and why we say certain things that we do. Emotional intelligence is a key component in driving equity and inclusion. And it's also important for career growth, not even just learning within school. When you get into the real world, you need to be able to have conversations. You need to be able to drive strong relationships, and you really want to be a well-rounded individual, which is what emotional intelligence is about. Thank you.
Yeah, that whole thing of the growth mindset, like even everything Sally is saying, to do these things, we need to have this growth mindset. And it's always funny that some of the stuff you mentioned, it's like empathy. That's something I remember doing it in elementary school. And it's something familiar to us, but it's needed for actually making that change. Thanks so much. Imran, I'm just looking at time too, because I want to make sure we have time to finish and also have time for the Q&A. Imran, the question I have for you, especially as someone with Crime Stoppers, and we've talked about this police and being an institution, so you're kind of partner with the police, but you aren't that police system. Can you answer for us, what barriers do BIPOC communities face when reporting crime, and how does Crime Stoppers help to mitigate those barriers?
That's an excellent question, Carissa, and thank you for asking. It's not just BIPOC communities, but communities where there are newcomers to Canada who may have faced a negative interaction or experience with police from the countries they came to Canada, or before they came to Canada, and therefore they become reluctant to contact the police once they arrive here. And so they may be living in circumstances where there is criminal or suspicious activities going on around them, but they're reluctant to contact the police because of the fear of reprisal. And so what Crime Stoppers does, it provides that anonymous, confidential tip line to be able to report these activities. And I want to make it very clear that when someone contacts Crime Stoppers, number one, we don't have a caller ID recording mechanism. We don't record your IP address when you report through our tip line service on the web. And should you inadvertently report, during the report, provide your name and or your address, we delete that information before that information is forwarded to police for investigation. So that's something that's very important. I think that helps to build that resilience in vulnerable communities where individuals are reluctant to contact police directly, so they can contact Crime Stoppers, who will then take that information and then disseminate that through the different law enforcement agencies. So that in itself empowers people to be able to make that report and know that they never have to give up their identity, they never have to testify in court, and that they will remain anonymous and your information remains confidential.
Thank you for sharing that and how it's like, and what you're doing to support your community members and realizing, yeah, there is a barrier that people are facing of needing to reach out, but can't, and providing that for community members. I appreciate that. For our students in the space, Aman, I will start with you. If you can answer, and for both of you, I have the same question. If you can answer, do you feel equipped to navigate situations where you face injustice? And I know, Aman, you kind of talked already about how, hey, you know, things are actually pretty all right here. But when it comes to these moments you were mentioning with microaggression and these kind of jokes that are happening, do you feel equipped to address those situations happening at school? And do you feel supported by whether teachers or administration to have those conversations?
Yeah, so I think it would really depend on the intensity of the injustice that I'm facing. For example, if it was just one person throwing microaggressions at me that were my age, then I would probably be confident in navigating that situation because they're my age, they have the same power as me, and it's just one person. So I would know techniques, for example, like confronting the person, making them see what they're doing is wrong, to make them realize they're not funny, and asking them why they're doing it and how that makes me feel. And with the same thing, I can get support from my family or friends or coworkers/supervisors if it's in a professional setting. However, if the injustice is pretty intense for things like macroaggressions or a large group of people that aren't my age, that are older than me and have more power than me, if I'm getting injustice in those types of situations, then it would really be difficult for me to navigate situations like that because, for one, I've never had any experience navigating situations like that. So I would have no idea what to do or anyone that I could really ask for support. And something I would like to share is that an example I've heard from my parents is sometimes they're disregarded from a job just because they have a foreign sounding name. Situations like that would be really hard for me to navigate because how would you even identify in the first place that the reason you're rejected from a job, the reason you're injustice is because you have a foreign sounding name? That's not really in your control, and it's hard to identify that in the first place. So it'd be really difficult to navigate situations like that where racism and injustice is really intertwined and deeply rooted into our society. And yeah, for an individual person, it would really be hard and difficult to navigate situations like that because you would need somebody in authority or a large group of people to fight against it. So in general, I think I'm equipped to navigate situations that are less intense with somebody my age, but it would be really difficult for me in more intense situations out in the world.
Yeah, I feel you on that, and I appreciate you sharing. It does change based on the scenario and your comfort level and what you're facing. And you haven't faced it, do you feel equipped? And I'm wondering, as you answer the same question, do you agree with Aman? Are you dealing with the same things, or where do you find difference in what he said?
Yeah, so I think that people can face injustice anywhere. And I think I'm now equipped with the tools to face injustices and navigate certain situations. It is hard to go through different types of unjust situations. And I was previously not equipped for these types of situations because I was never taught through our schools, parents, or teachers. CACD helped me understand the types of injustices that can occur, how to cope with them, and using certain tools to face these types of injustice scenarios. Some tools I can share with all of you are just talking about it, looking out for each other with kindness. And we need to remember that hate is not created, it's born. To amplify student voices, look for reliable media outlets, strive for mental wellness, educating yourselves, and most importantly, supporting one another. I certainly do know where to find support if I need it. I have my family, friends, teachers, guidance counselors, youth workers, CACD staff, and crisis hotlines. There are even many resources that all of us can look for as well. Well, what else can we do in the face of injustice? We can show compassion, kindness, generosity. We can call out bigotry and hate speech and teach children about kindness, fairness, and human rights. But we can never show ignorance or turn away from these types of situations. We must fight all injustices because everyone should be treated fairly and not be discriminated against due to their race, gender, sexuality, social status, etc. And the last and most important thing I want to say is that we have to educate the future of the world. So the children and youth have the tools to navigate it just as we have learned as well, and to face it in their life and minimize it for their futures as well. And I think Aman brought up a great point of repeating some of what I said as well.
Thank you for adding that and sharing kind of those resources that you have and that you know that are accessible to you. It's good to kind of hear them out loud and be like, okay, maybe I need that, even for anyone else in that space. And I know that moment of one, having those resources are great. And when sometimes in your life, you're gonna have that time when you actually have to use them. And that step can be difficult and scary, but knowing that you have them is kind of that first step. I'm glad you have the supports, that you're connected. I'm glad that you're part of our community, because that's what we love to do, is actually be one of that support for young people when faced with these challenges. Thank you to the panelists for sharing all this stuff. There's a lot of good stuff that has been brought up, and I'm wondering for the audience, as you've heard the panelists speak and you share, I know that you have questions and things stirring of like, oh, I think I need that explained. I know for me, this word of hate crime has been brought up a lot, and I think it was Sally who mentioned the difficulty of measuring that within our systems. So I'm wondering from the audience, do you have any questions? What do you need further explanation on? You can open up a general question for panelists, or if you have a specific one you want to say, hey, Imran, I want you to answer this, then you can do that as well. I'm going to take a look at the chat and see what we have going on. I know I've been seeing even some of our high school participants commenting and agreeing and kind of cheering each other on, which I always so appreciate. But what has been stirring for you as you've heard these panelists talk? I'll let people kind of think and type, because they always know it takes a second. And you're also free to raise your hand as well. But if people are thinking, maybe I will start off with this conversation around hate crime. And sometimes, you may be walking down the street and someone makes a comment. I've been in public where someone has made a comment to me and it's in passing and it happens quick, and that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know how to report that. I don't know what to do with that. And as we see these things happening with, even in Canada, the amount of hate crime that is happening, when we think about London, Ontario last year, what do we do with this? And how do we manage hate? It sometimes feels like the adult version of bullying, and it's so serious. I'm wondering if we can expand on that, but I'm also seeing a question come in.
So I would say, when I think as part of what really we need to talk about is how is hate crime actually defined. So that's the first step that we need to know. So as far as hate crimes are concerned, it has to be a criminal act. So it has to be a violation of Criminal Code Canada before it will be as a hate crime. Discrimination itself, someone yelling, racial epithets and slurs at you, that's not criminal. It's offensive. It is prejudicial. It would be hurtful. It's disgusting. It can be all those things, but it is not criminal because no crime has been committed. However, if along with the racial epithets, what's also, let's say someone decides to add a threat attached to that, that threat would then basically elevate that occurrence into a crime. So then what would happen is you call the police and the police is going to take a report of it. And when they take the report down, they are then going to identify it as threatening, motivated by hate, bias, or prejudice.
Right.
And that ends up in front of the court system. And all that it does, that labeling, all that labeling does is that once it goes to the court, the crowns take a look at it, the judges take a look at it, and upon multiple other factors that will be, it will hinge upon, but there is a possibility that the perpetrator will actually get a more, this would be considered as extenuating circumstances in sentencing. So the reason we continue to talk about labeling or identifying hate crimes, it's not the act of violence. So let's say there's an assault, and it is assault level 3, so it's aggravated assault. It's, you know, skin open, blood. I'm sorry, trigger warning. You know, it just like it's a bad kind of outcome. If the assault was motivated by hate, bias, or prejudice of the perpetrator against the person who's being targeted, then the police is going to call it assault or aggravated assault, and then deem it as hate crime or motivated by bias. And when that happens, when it goes in front of the judges, when it goes in front of the crowns, they're then going to ask for a greater sentencing.
Right.
Also, avenues for those who've been victimized to have greater access to supports by the government. You know, so victim services are mandated to help and offer support to those who've been victimized by hate crimes. Now, for those people who, let's say someone starts kind of following you around in a mall, and they may not be seeing anything, but they're really giving you the stinky, hairy eyeball. And you know, you kind of sort of walk away feeling uncomfortable, getting a little bit of, you know, it's like, this just does not feel safe for me. They may mutter some things under their breath. You may not have captured everything, so you think you have heard certain words, but you're not sure because they didn't say it out loud. You can and should report that to the police as well. So a couple of options at that time, of course, is going straight up to the security in the mall and letting them know that you're being followed and that you're feeling unsafe. So then here, as a mall person, as a mall security person, they may end up calling the police themselves as well to say, hey, we need to then put a trespass notice on this person. That person is not allowed to come in. Like there are ways of learning to protect and work with the system. What happens though, when you call the police and the police comes in, they're going to ask you basic questions. And that's what I'm talking about, the intentionality. It's all evidence-based, remember? No one is proven, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. So you have to have that evidence in front. If I cannot have that evidence in front of me, but I say, hey, this was the impact, this is what I felt, this will be seen as a possible hate bias motivated incident, non-criminal. So Peel Regional Police Service does keep a record of that. And those are extremely significant and important for us to have. What ends up happening is by the time an act of aggravated assault happens, prior to that, there would have been the glaring eyeballs, there would have been the muttered under the breath, there would be someone throwing a Pepsi can at you, for example, someone spitting on the ground right next to you. By the way, if anybody ever experiences spitting, that is considered an assault. It's assault 1. Absolutely call the police. The person will be charged for assault. So, you know, there's that bit of education and information that really needs to be shared, and that really needs to be kind of understood, that as these activities of violence and these activities of hatred and bias and prejudice kind of continue to increase and remain unchallenged, they will get to that phase of murder at the end of the day. Right? And so by the time you get to that phase, there is so much before that that has remained unchallenged, unnoticed, uncharted, that it is important to keep that as a record. And so what ends up happening, and crowns always say that, and just, you know, like you'll have justices will say the same thing, is they look at the history before the sentencing will happen, right? So if it is, oh, it's a 17-year-old or 18, just turned 18, you know, good old person, went to the bar, probably got drunk. Again, alcohol doesn't make you racist. Never has. You were racist. You already had certain ideologies and thought processes. The only thing alcohol does is that it just makes you feel brave. That's about it.
Yeah.
So all those words and all those thought processes and everything that starts kind of coming out, those were already inside of you. It's just you're over less now. So, you know, what ends up happening though, of course, is, you know, being drunk where you don't know what you're doing is a defense. So, you know, the judges and, you know, the defense is going to come up and say, well, sorry, first time they got drunk, they didn't know what they were doing. They're good kids. Nothing has ever happened before. But if there is a whole litany of different activities that is actually on record for them to have had done all that, the defense has nothing to say about, oh, these are good kids where nothing has happened. Right? So
And I think
there's a whole.
sometimes people. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think even people not reporting, like, oh, if I report, like, what's the big deal? They're not going to do anything. But hearing of when we keep these things tracked and we are paying attention to these reoccurring things, and it starts to pop up as a trend, we can pay attention to that because we think I'm just one person. It was just one time, but you don't know. Maybe that's the third time that this person has done something, and just being able to report. Yeah.
And that's what they're kind of counting on,
right?
Is the lack of reporting. They're actually counting on the fact that people are not going to be reporting them.
And then people can get away with stuff. Salia, thank you so much. I see Aman, your hands up, and I'm wondering if you're adding to what Salia is saying, but I also know that Rowan has a question. So Aman, I'll let you kind of go ahead and add on to that, and I'll ask for Rowan's question.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to add to what Salia said and just speak to the students specifically. There's a huge notion within schools that we have of snitching. You're not actually snitching on someone. I know this one administration that I work with, she calls it being brave, because you're disabling that person from continuing to act by letting them know and acknowledging that they're doing something wrong. You're actually preventing them from acting in the future. And by, sorry, someone's voice came in the background. By actually sharing, by not sharing what happened to you, you're actually telling that person that what they're doing is okay. So I just wanted to iterate the point that you're not snitching on someone, you're actually being brave and trying to make a change within your community. So that whole concept of snitching is just a way for people to get away with injustices that are being done within school. And you should really express your emotions and express when instances happen to you. I'm sure Imran probably says the same thing. Salia agrees with the same thing. It's not snitching, it's being brave. So just wanted to really highlight that point.
Yeah, and it's wild because just today with middle school, one of our placement students was talking about bullying and snitching. That's exactly what you said of it's not. I like that comment of being brave. That's really resonating. And I know Rowan was asking before, and maybe Salia kind of answered some of your questions, but even that whole thing of what do you do in the moment that you're faced with discrimination? What is the right thing to do? And I'm just looking at some folks in the chat saying, yeah, reporting is so important. One should be aware that there are also instances of false reporting as well. And I'm on adding, this is a very good point. People always get discouraged by snitching. Exactly. I'm wondering if a panelist wants to talk about, you're a young person, maybe you're a young BIPOC person, and you were faced with discrimination at school. In that moment, what is the right thing to do? And I'll also let the person, because I see Abby's question coming in, and what happens if that discrimination comes from a person in authority like a teacher?
It's going to take a lot of energy and a lot of courage and an intense amount of support before you can feel comfortable going up and changing the status quo. And so the first thing that I would say is, especially for young people, been there, done that. And so I'm going to say, surround yourself with people who care for you. Surround yourself with your peers, your family. If you happen to have family that would hear you out, then that's a gift. If you have family that still doesn't understand, try and make them understand about what's happening. Definitely talk to your parents if you have access to that. Again, keeping in mind that I'm also kind of using, the kind of normalizing the what is seen to be the normal family of, 2 parents and one kid and a dog, but it doesn't have to be like that, of course. And that's why I'm saying is if you have access to family or family-like figures or people that you trust, please talk to them, let them know what has happened. That needs to be recorded for your own benefit. The other thing is within the school system, And I will let the, those who are like Aman and others who are working in there to really talk about, but are there peer support systems? Are there, do you have an anti-racism club? Do you have like a peer support group of some sort? Do you, social workers? Is there a public health nurse who is known to be compassionate and who actually hears you out? Find those folks. If there happens to be a teacher that you trust and and you have experience with them and you've heard good things about them, absolutely go and tap into that as well. What about your vice principals? Is there something that you can do, right? So don't be afraid to seek out and talk to the people that are in positions of power. If it happens to be the person who is in the position of power who's doing this, go above them. Go above them. Talk to other students. Find out if this is it just your experience? Is it just the experience of girls in the class? Is it just the experience of boys in the class? Is it just the experience of girls of color in the class? What is happening? Because the first thing that we always tend to do is question ourselves. And so if you're feeling off about something, think about it. Don't always question yourself. Listen to your gut. Don't just doubt yourself to say, because that's where gaslighting always comes in. Oh no, the person never really meant to harm you. That's exactly what bullies are always walking away with. Oh, that was just a joke. Can't you take a joke? Well, no, that was not a joke. That was hurtful. Don't do that again, right? So yes, it does take a lot of energy, and it takes a ton of amount of feeling, kind of isolated and alone. And so if you are feeling that, please reach out. Please connect with people who will listen to you. Absolutely be there in terms of self-care is so significant. You are worthy, you're important, you are valued, you are loved, and you, just by being yourself as the kid you are, as the young person you are, you bring so much to the universe. You're such a gift. Don't allow some evil person to just completely take, just overshadow that. And I think we don't tell our children enough. We do not do that. We don't talk to the youth enough. We don't talk to, my baby's 25. I still have to tell him this. I still have to tell him I love him. Whether he rolls his eyes or not, that's fine. But I know that I'll continue to do that, because there will be a time when he's 35, inshallah, God willing, and maybe he'll miss the fact that his mom doesn't get to say I love him, right? So I think it's really important for you as those who are young people. I'm speaking as a mother. I'm speaking as someone who's highly privileged and very, very blessed with daughters and sons. And I am telling you, I exist for my children. This is why I do what I do. In terms of even speaking about this whole thing around racism and fighting discrimination, and that a big part of it, very selfishly for me, is for my nephews and nieces and my great nephews and nieces, and for my children, and whenever the grandkids will come. I don't know if they will. Right now, I just really care too much about them, but.
Hey, and when grandkids come, we're gonna love them just as much. And I appreciate you saying that. I'm reading Yasin's comment in the chat of hearing it from your parents is so significant. And we think about the social determinants of health, and when we understand intergenerational trauma, of how sometimes our parents are impacted in a way that we don't hear it from them, and how do we kind of break these systems. I'm looking at the time, and I know we have 2 minutes left before we're going to do our draw. And I'm just kind of noticing some things in the chat of, yes, it's so important to hear some parents, and everyone saying, thank you very much for answering that question. I agree that talking to a family member or a member at school will help. It does take a lot of courage, but it will not help you. It'll help others, exactly, to not be discriminated against. Thank you again for sharing. And maybe as young people, you need to take stock of like, okay, who are the trusted adults in my life that I have? Who are the teachers? Who are the youth workers? Who are the CACD staff that I feel comfortable with? And being prepared for, if you're ever faced with that situation, if I have my parents, or I have this person. Just with 2 minutes on the clock before we have to transition, I wonder, Aman, if you kind of wanted to add to that question. I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I think Salia just said something important. She said, don't allow some evil people to put you down, but don't allow the fear within yourself to put you down either. And like, emotions are normal. It's normal to feel fear, but you also want to use that fear to drive you. You can react in two different ways when you're feeling emotions, right? You can either let it impact you negatively, or you can let it impact you to drive change and drive experience. So I just want to reiterate that your emotions play a huge role. And when you're taking that step back, be aware of the emotions you're feeling and use those emotions to drive you in order to make the positive change that you want to see. Don't get into those negative feedback loops, because once you start letting fear put you down, for example, when it comes to racism, you're going to let fear of going into a new job put you down. You're going to let fear of taking that next growth step in your life put you down. So channel those emotions into positive experience and know that those emotions are normal. And as humans, we all experience them, but it's the way that we react and our perspective on them that allows us to move forward or move back.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's actually a good note to pause on as we kind of stop and we transition of don't let this fear stop you either. And even in this space, there's people here who want to be engaging this conversation. There's people here with you who are thinking the same things and want to see the same change, and know that you're not alone, and that we're definitely here to support you in that. Thank you to everyone who is asking questions. I know more questions I think are coming in, and to our panelists for just sharing so honestly and with true advice in there too, and sometimes hard facts, but true facts. Ron, I will pass it to you as we're kind of getting ready to close.
Okay, thank you so much. That was great facilitation, and you've done an excellent job there, Carissa. I really appreciate you. But let me just thank all the panelists who have participated, Dr. Hutchinson, Doc H, as he's known as. Tremendous job. We see Salia, excellent presentation. I knew it was coming, and it's so touching. And I'm sure quite a few of the young people will leave here tonight having a new approach to dealing with these things. So thank you so much, Salia. And then we have Imran. Don't know if Imran is still with us. Thank you so much for stepping in and doing such an excellent job. Aman, my friend, as always, there is so much wisdom from a young man like you. You did an excellent job last time, and that's even one reason why you're back. And here you are again, providing us with these insights. And how can I thank my two young friends? Aman has been with us now almost a year. And we just so appreciate you, Aman, for the work that you're doing as a participant in our program. And here you are tonight again, providing us with such great insight. And then the ball of energy, Miss Abna. So sweet, so knowledgeable, so bright. And we just look for, and again, we talk of Abna. She's just in grade 10, But yes, thank you all for such a tremendous job. I'm not going to try to recap. We don't have the time, and I don't have the mind to really go back and pull on all that was said. Thank God we have a tape. I can review it and come up with some notes thereafter. But at the same time, I just want all our friends to know how much we appreciate them taking time out of their busy schedule to be with us. We really appreciate it. We want to thank our technicians, Sonia, Errol, and Lyndon. We do appreciate the work that you guys did for us this evening. And for Aminata, who also did the land acknowledgement, thank you all. But before you all go, we have a little prizes for you guys. We have this card. This is an OVO card, value $75, that will be going to one of our youth attendees. And we have two books, Burden Legacy. And I can assure you, well, not from my reading, I know Sylvia very well. She's a family friend, but I have not read her book, but Sonia have read her previous books and, told me about it. She was so engrossed that she just took it one night, keep reading. Didn't talk to me, no breakfast in the morning. She continued reading until she finished it. So it's that engrossing. And I listen to how Sonia described it. I can say this is another Jackie Collins, you know. So we thank Sylvia for this opportunity to share these books. And we hope that it's going to be, of course, one of you guys. I hope it's going to be a good, but it's 2 books. So it will be for 2 of you, adults. And of course, we hope it's one of our good friends. I certainly hope it's one from our program that will be getting this OVO card. That is the Drake October very own card. So again, guys, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Carissa and I think Joseph, who is going to determine who the winners are. But again, before you go, one last thing, we'll be having a 3rd session when we are going to try and put everything together and get solutions, you know, action, things that we will do. And I've heard some already. I heard some neat one coming from Salia and others, including Aman, sorry. And we hope that this 3rd session, which is slated for the 1st week of July, we're going to do this in person at the Mississauga Valley Community Center, home of CACD. And we're hoping that we're going to see all of you guys. We're going to have a fun time. We're going to have refreshment and all that jazz. So please look out for the email. Carissa, please take it over.
Thank you, Ron. I'm excited to give these prizes away. And Sonia, I'm wondering if you can give myself and Dada the ability to share screen. Dada is helping to display the names as well. And when I have share screen, I will go ahead. So I'll start off with, thank you, Sonia. I will start off with the student draw. So these are the students for the OVO card. These students had entered into the contest and they had answered, they had to do a few things to get this. And they had answered some questions on our Instagram and show up today. And so these young people are here and it is time for the draw. So of course, whatever it is, however you drum roll, let's see who wins the OVO card. Oh my goodness, that was very close. So, Humaniza, are you here in this space? I'm pretty sure I saw you. You got to make sure. I heard, well, I see in the chat that you said you're looking forward to the 3rd one. So I'm glad that you're going to be coming back again. And you are the winner of the gift card. That's very exciting. Awesome. I will stop sharing screen and Dada. I will have you share screen for the books. And whoever wins the books are going to have to do a book club. The 2 people.
Okay, give me a quick second.
All right. You can go ahead and spin that wheel and we will see who the first winner of the book is. Krish. Oh, I will, because Krish was in the other draw, here, spin again, press remove. Because Krish was already in the other draw. I will try again for that one. Sorry, Krish. Oh, Wes. Wes is the first winner of the book. And you can press remove and we'll do it one more time. I saw your comment, Genesis. This one's kind of more for the adults. Ah, Marjorie, you also won the book. Wonderful. Thank you for everyone. And it's just the 2 are the ones for the book. Thank you, Dada, for spinning that wheel and getting those names sorted out for us. But unfortunately, only 2 books. So I'll have you stop sharing for us. Thank you again. To the book winners and the prize winners, we will be in contact with you so you can start reading and shopping as soon as possible. And again, congrats to all the winners. And thank you for coming out and being a part of this space.
Thank you all, guys. Really appreciate you. It continues. It continues. Special thanks to Salia, Akage, Iman, you know, all of you guys. And I see my good friend Celine. Thank you for being here. Yeah, listen to my sister. Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys, all of you. It was so nice to see you all. I mean, I know it's a very unusual time, but even that, you were able to come out and listen to the conversation. And again, it continues, and I am looking forward to the third forum. Hopefully it will be doubled as we're all going to be meeting in person. So it should be an exciting time. We do appreciate all of you. Have a wonderful evening and God bless.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.